Hey there everyone, and good day. This here is Robert back with another episode of EOI Review. Everything you need to know to pass slimy end of instruction U.S. history test. And in the last video we talked about how the United States of America, under FDR's leadership, was already fighting an undeclared naval war against Nazi Germany in the Atlantic Ocean. What's important here to understand is the Japanese ambitions in this war. Now, Japan had already seized control of the northeastern part of China, a region known as Manchuria. And in July of 1937, the Chief of Staff of Japan's Kwantung Army, Hideki Tojo, launched a full-scale invasion of mainland China. And Japanese leaders had been leaping at the opportunities to gobble up the French and British colonies around the Pacific and in Southeast Asia, seizing control of these colonial lands. And the British and the French were way too busy in Europe with the Nazis to really be able to even fight back. So that means that only the United States of America and its Pacific islands, and more importantly, its Pacific Navy, stood in the way of fulfilling the dreams of this massive Japanese empire. Now in July of 1941, they launched an invasion and they took over French military bases throughout what is known as Indochina. That would be modern-day Vietnam, Cambodia, and Laos. Now the United States responded to this aggression by cutting off all trade with Japan. Now the thing that hurt Japan the most was the oil that it needed to fuel its war machine. And without that oil, the Japanese leaders commented, we could be defeated without our enemies ever even having to strike a single blow against us. Without the oil to feed that machine, that war machine dies. So Japan had two options here. You either persuade the United States to end this oil embargo, or you go out and you seize the oil fields of the Dutch East Indies. Now to do this though against the United States of America would mean war. Now Japan had been carrying out peace talks with the United States, and Hideki Tojo had this very important meeting with the Japanese Emperor Hirohito. And the Japanese government really wanted to preserve this peace with the United States, but they just decided this was no longer feasible. So on November the 5th, 1941, Tojo ordered the Japanese Navy to prepare to go on and attack the United States of America. Now the United States, by this point, we had already broken the Japanese secret communication codes that they used to communicate with their ships out at sea. And we knew that they were preparing for some kind of an offensive strike. The question was, where would this come? Now, Hawaii certainly wasn't out of the question, but it was far more likely it would happen either in the Philippines, closer to where they'd been operating, or perhaps even Guam. And Roosevelt knew that this could happen at some point, but he's like, all we can really do is sit back and wait. If this war is going to come, let the Japanese strike first. And on December the 6th, 1941, the President of the United States of America, Franklin Roosevelt, received a decoded message instructing the Japanese envoy to reject all peace negotiations with the United States government. So at this point, we know it's on. In fact, Roosevelt was quoted as saying, this means war. Now, as for the attack on Pearl Harbor, that came the next morning. I mean, this is just literally the very next day. Japanese dive bombers swooped down low over Pearl Harbor. This was the largest, the most important U.S. Navy base in the entire Pacific Ocean. We're talking over 180 Japanese warplanes here, launching a massive attack from 6 separate aircraft carriers. So you can imagine that Sunday morning, you're sitting there in your cot, sleeping in. This would be a day the United States naval troopers would be allowed to sleep in. You get woken up by an air raid going off, and the announcement, this is not a drill. This is not a drill. What that must have felt like. And of course, seconds later you hear the explosions and the ground shaking. For over an hour and a half, the Japanese Air Force just continues rolling in here, barely disturbed at all. I mean, the United States of America cannot launch much more of a comeback from even anti-aircraft guns, much less get these planes up off the ground. I mean, hundreds of U.S. planes are destroyed setting on the runway. The ships are sitting ducks in the harbor, anchored in the harbor. The devastation here is appalling. All we can do is get a few anti-aircraft guns firing back in response. So in less than 2 hours, the Japanese Navy inflicted 2,403 deaths on Americans and wounded another 1,178. 21 ships just sitting there in the harbor are either sunk or seriously damaged, including 8 battleships. This is the bulk of the U.S. Pacific Fleet. It's 300 planes destroyed or severely crippled sitting on the runway. Now, by chance, we got lucky. Our 3 aircraft carriers were out at sea. They managed to escape this disaster, because if they'd have been hit, oh my God, that's the largest, most expensive, time-consuming things to build. These things are like floating cities. The fact that those 3 survived, that's going to be crucial to the war's outcome. So the reaction to Pearl Harbor, what do you got here? Outrage, you got panic. And Roosevelt, he's sitting there in the White House getting these responses. And Eleanor Roosevelt commented on this later, saying each report was more terrible than the last. And Roosevelt was commented as saying, I never wanted to fight this war on 2 fronts. We don't have the Navy to do this. We have to build up the Navy to even be able to begin to do this. And he predicted we would have to take many good defeats before we could ever achieve a victory. So the next day, he goes in front of Congress. He gives that speech yesterday, December 7th, 1941, a date which will live in infamy. He called it an unprovoked and dastardly attack against the United States of America. Congress wastes no time with this, coming out and approving this declaration of war. We declare war on Japan that day. And of course, what about Germany? What about Italy? Well, 3 days later, they, for whatever reason, declare war against the United States of America. So that means the United States of America goes from not being in the war, 4-day span here, goes from being at war with no one to being at war with Japan, Germany, and Italy, the 3 Axis powers. And isolationism all but disappeared. We do get one no vote in Congress from Jeanette Rankin, the only female member of Congress, says, I have to vote no on behalf of all the mothers whose sons are going to die in this conflict. Aside from that, everyone jumps on board here. I mean, even the most isolationist members of Congress, people who were totally against the war, like Burton Wheeler, said, the only thing now to do is to go out and lick the hell out of them. That's a direct quote, so yeah, it's about as bad of a thing as you're going to hear me say on this page, but that's what the man said. We got to go out now and do this thing. So, if you like this content, please like, subscribe, share, watch these videos. I mean, they are here for you. And remember, a video a day keeps the F grade away.